The Iron Blades thought they owned Eastbridge. They'd carved their empire from the city's forgotten streets, ruling through extortion and fear, leaving broken dreams in their wake. Their latest target was just another cab driver, a quiet man who kept his head down and minded his business. The kind of man they'd crushed 100 times before. But shadows can hide more than fear. Behind Ray Carter's unassuming smile lay a ghost that had protected presidents and hunted assassins across 4 continents. The same ghost that had orchestrated the most sophisticated protective operations in Secret Service history, outsmarting international crime syndicates without ever showing his hand. The legend they called the Shadow of Washington. Because by the time you realized he was there, your plans were already in ruins. Now, watching their enforcers vandalize his taxi, surrounded by the city's most vicious gang members, Ray Carter is exactly where he wants to be. Because sometimes justice wears a disguise. Sometimes it takes a man who's danced with death in embassy corridors to free a neighborhood from fear. And the Iron Blades are about to learn why. Even 15 years later, hardened criminals still remember the agent who never lost a protectee and never failed a mission. They see a cab driver. They should be seeing their worst nightmare. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The first hints of dawn painted the sky in muted shades of purple and gray as Ray Carter guided his yellow taxi through the empty streets of Eastbridge. His dark eyes, sharp and alert despite the early hour, continuously scanned his surroundings through the rearview mirror, an old habit he'd never managed to break. 4th and Mason, he muttered to himself, checking the time. 4:45 a.m. His first pickup of the day would be Mrs. Chun, right on schedule. The elderly woman had been taking his cab to the wholesale market every Wednesday for the past 3 years, never once missing her weekly ritual. Ray's cab, a 2012 Toyota Camry, hummed steadily beneath him. The vehicle bore the battle scars of countless city miles, a few minor dents in the passenger door, slight scratches along the bumper, and a small crack in the corner of the windshield that had been there so long it felt like an old friend. The interior, however, was meticulously maintained. Ray took pride in keeping the leather seats conditioned and the floor mats spotless, even if the exterior suggested otherwise. As he turned onto Mason Street, his trained eye caught the fresh splashes of crimson paint marring the brick walls. The Iron Blade's signature color. Their tag, a twisted blade dripping blood, had been appearing with increasing frequency throughout the neighborhood. Ray's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he pulled up to Mrs. Chen's building. The tiny woman emerged from the shadows of her doorway, clutching her oversized purse close to her chest. Ray quickly stepped out to help her into the cab. "Good morning, Mrs. Chun." "Ah, Ray," she smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. "Always so punctual. Did you eat breakfast? I brought you steamed buns." Ray accepted the small paper bag with a grateful nod. "You're too kind, Mrs. Chun. The market today." Yes. But..." She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Different route today, maybe?" "Those boys, they were there again yesterday, breaking Mr. Watson's windows." Ray understood immediately. The Iron Blades had been expanding their territory, demanding protection money from local businesses. Mr. Watson's convenience store was the latest target. "Don't worry," Ray assured her, smoothly pulling away from the curb. "I know a better way." As they drove, Ray's eyes caught a black SUV with tinted windows crawling past an intersection. Something about its movement pattern triggered his instincts. It was moving too slowly, too deliberately. Without missing a beat, he made 2 quick turns, confirming his suspicion when the vehicle appeared in his mirror again. His right hand unconsciously flexed, the scar tissue along his palm catching the early morning light, a souvenir from a different life. Mrs. Chin chatted softly about her grandchildren as Ray navigated through the back streets, eventually losing their tail. By the time they reached the market, the sun had fully risen, casting long shadows across the loading docks where vendors were setting up their stalls. "Thank you, Ray," Mrs. Chin said, pressing an extra $5 into his hand despite his protests. "You're a good man. We need more like you in this neighborhood." Ray watched until she disappeared into the market before checking his phone. His next regular would be Sarah Martinez, a single mother who worked the morning shift at Metro General Hospital. He had 15 minutes to make it to her apartment on Oak Street. The morning continued with its familiar rhythm. Sarah climbed into his cab at 6:15 a.m., her nurse's scrubs slightly wrinkled but pristine. "Morning, Ray," she yawned, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "Did you hear about what happened at Watson's?" Mrs. Chin mentioned something. Ray replied, carefully navigating around a pothole he knew by heart. "They're getting worse," Sarah said, her voice tight with worry. "My brother Marco saw them hassling some kids outside the community center yesterday. Just teenagers, Ray. They're recruiting younger and younger." Ray's knuckles whitened slightly on the steering wheel. In his rearview mirror, he caught sight of another gang tag, this one fresh enough that the paint still glistened in the morning light. "How's Tommy doing in school?" he asked, deliberately changing the subject. Sarah's face brightened at the mention of her son. "Much better since you helped him with his math. He got a B+ on his last test." Ray allowed himself a small smile. Tommy was a good kid, smart and eager to learn. He'd started helping him with homework during the time Sarah had to work late shifts, something that had begun accidentally, but had become a regular arrangement. After dropping Sarah at the hospital, Ray's next fare was Marcus Webb, a young law student who lived in the renovated loft buildings on the edge of the neighborhood. Marcus was one of the few who'd grown up in East Bridge and made it to graduate school, though Ray knew the monthly loan payments were crushing him. "You're looking sharp today," Ray commented as Marcus slid into the back seat, adjusting his tie. "Big day at the firm," Marcus grinned. "Might finally get that junior associate position." His smile faltered slightly as they passed Watson's store, where workers were boarding up the broken windows. "Man, this neighborhood's changing, Ray. Not for the better." "Everything changes," Ray replied neutrally, but his eyes never stopped moving, cataloging details others might miss. The new security cameras the bodega had installed, the way people hurried past certain corners, the increasing number of empty storefronts. Between fares, Ray allowed himself a brief stop at his regular coffee shop. As he waited for his order, his hand unconsciously moved to the glove compartment, where behind the vehicle registration and insurance papers lay a worn leather wallet. Inside, protected by a plastic sleeve, was a badge he hadn't looked at in years, a reminder of the life he'd left behind. The rest of the morning passed in a familiar parade of passengers. Office workers, students, elderly residents heading to medical appointments. Each had their stories, their fears, their hopes. Ray listened to them all, filing away details that might seem insignificant to others, but painted a clear picture to his trained eye. The iron blades were tightening their grip on East Bridge. At noon, Ray took his usual break, parking his cab in front of his apartment building, a modest 5-story walk-up that had seen better days. His unit was on the 4th floor, and he took the stairs 2 at a time out of habit, never using the unreliable elevator. The apartment was small but meticulously organized. Sunlight filtered through the single window, illuminating a space that revealed little about its occupant. The walls were mostly bare except for a few carefully framed photographs. A younger Ray in a dark suit, standing at attention. A beautiful woman with warm eyes and a brilliant smile. His late wife, Maria. A group photo from what appeared to be a graduation ceremony, though the insignias and badges had been carefully removed. Ray moved to the kitchen, automatically checking the locks and sight lines as he prepared a simple lunch. The TV hummed quietly in the background, providing white noise until a familiar name caught his attention. Latest in a series of violent incidents attributed to the Iron Blades gang, the news anchor was saying. Police are investigating the connection between yesterday's vandalism at local businesses and a string of assaults in the East Bridge area. Community leaders are calling for increased police presence, but sources say department resources are already stretched thin. Ray's hand paused over his sandwich as security camera footage played across the screen, showing 3 young men in red jackets smashing the windows of Watson's store. Their faces were obscured, but Ray's trained eye caught details others might miss. The way one favored his left leg, another's distinctive watch glinting in the streetlight. The report continued, discussing the gang's growing influence and the community's mounting fear. Ray's jaw tightened as he recognized faces in the crowd footage. Mrs. Chun hurrying past with her head down, Sarah clutching Tommy's hand as they quickly crossed the street, Marcus looking over his shoulder as he entered the library. These were his people now, not by choice or assignment, but by the simple act of sharing their daily lives, their struggles, their small victories and mounting fears. He'd chosen this life, driving a cab, keeping to the shadows, staying uninvolved after everything that had happened. After Maria. After the mission that had gone so terribly wrong. But as he watched the news footage, saw the fear in his neighbor's eyes, felt the weight of the badge hidden in his cab's glove compartment, Ray Carter realized that sometimes the hardest choices aren't between right and wrong, but between safety and necessity. His phone buzzed, another fare requesting pickup. Ray turned off the TV, straightened his collar, and headed back to his cab. As he descended the stairs, his mind wandered to the hidden compartment under his bed, where a locked box contained tools and memories from his previous life. Tools he'd promised himself he'd never use again. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across East Bridge as Ray's taxi merged back into traffic. To all outward appearances, he was just another cab driver, anonymous and unremarkable. But his eyes never stopped moving, his mind never stopped calculating, and his conscience never stopped whispering that sometimes the greatest sin isn't action, but inaction. As he pulled up to his next fare, Ray pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the present moment. But in the back of his mind, a clock was ticking, counting down to a confrontation he knew was becoming inevitable. The question wasn't if, but when, and whether he'd be ready to step out of the shadows when that moment arrived. The streetlights cast irregular shadows across Ray Carter's taxi as he cruised past Metro General Hospital. The digital clock on his dashboard read 11:47 p.m., usually time to call it a night, but something kept him on the road. Years of training had taught him to trust his instincts, and tonight they were telling him to stay alert. His radio crackled with a fare request from the corner of Maple and Fifth. Ray's fingers drummed thoughtfully on the steering wheel. That area had seen increased gang activity lately. After a moment's hesitation, he accepted the call. As he rounded the corner, Ray spotted a lone figure hunched against a brick wall. The young man couldn't have been more than 20, wearing a hooded sweatshirt despite the warm night. Ray pulled up slowly, noting how the figure flinched at the sound of his approaching vehicle. "Taxi," Ray called out softly, keeping his voice neutral and unthreatening. The young man lifted his head, and Ray's trained eye immediately caught the purple bruising around his left eye and the split lip that had only recently stopped bleeding. The kid glanced nervously over his shoulder before quickly sliding into the back seat. "Where to?" Ray asked, watching in his rearview mirror as the young man fidgeted with his sleeve. I'm not sure," the passenger admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Somewhere safe." Ray's eyes narrowed slightly. In his rearview mirror, he noticed a dark sedan turning onto their street, its headlights off. "What's your name?" "Michael. Michael Torres." He winced as he shifted in his seat. "Look, I know this sounds weird, but—" "The iron blades," Ray stated quietly, making it a statement rather than a question. He saw Michael's eyes widen in the mirror. "How did you—" "The bruising pattern. Their signature." Ray smoothly pulled away from the curb, keeping his speed casual. "They wanted you to join?" Michael's fingers unconsciously touched his swollen eye. "My cousin Ricky joined last year. They thought I'd be an easy recruit. Said it was time to step up for the neighborhood." He let out a bitter laugh. "I just wanted to finish community college." Ray checked his mirrors again. The sedan had fallen back, but a motorcycle had appeared, keeping pace 2 blocks behind them. "When did this happen?" "Tonight. They cornered me after my late class. Said I had to choose. Join them, or—" Michael's voice trailed off. "Or become an example," Ray finished, taking a right turn. The motorcycle followed. "Yeah." Michael slumped in his seat. "I ran. They caught me once, but I managed to get away. Been running ever since." Ray's mind worked quickly, mapping out routes while assessing their tale. The motorcycle rider wore a red jacket, Iron Blade's colors. "Listen carefully, Michael. I want you to slide down in your seat, below the window line. Don't ask questions, just do it." To his credit, Michael complied immediately. Ray took a sharp left, then another right, his movements deliberate but not urgent enough to draw attention. The darkness worked to their advantage, but he knew these streets wouldn't stay empty forever. "There's a shelter on Warren Street," Ray said quietly, taking another turn. "Run by Sister Agnes. She helps people who need to disappear for a while." "They'll find me," Michael whispered. "They always do." "Not this time." Ray's voice carried a certainty that made Michael look up. Sister Agnes has friends in the police department, immigration services, witness protection. She knows how to keep people safe. The motorcycle was gaining ground, and the sedan had reappeared. Ray's muscles tensed as he prepared for what came next. "Hold on," he warned, then yanked the wheel hard. The taxi swerved into a narrow alley, barely wide enough for the vehicle. Ray's movements were precise, confident, the product of years of evasive driving training he'd received in another life. The motorcycle's engine roared as it tried to follow, but the rider wasn't prepared for Ray's next move. He burst out of the alley onto a one-way street, going the wrong direction. Oncoming headlights flashed as Ray expertly weaved between two cars, using them as screens to block their pursuer's line of sight. The motorcycle fell behind, forced to take a longer route around. "Jesus!" Michael grabbed the door handle as Ray executed another sharp turn. "Who are you?" "Just a cab driver," Ray replied calmly, though his eyes never stopped scanning their surroundings. "Who knows these streets well?" They emerged onto Warren Street through a series of back alleys Ray doubted even local police knew about. The shelter, disguised as an abandoned church, stood dark and quiet. Ray pulled up to a side door nearly hidden by overgrown bushes. "Sister Agnes will be waiting. Tell her Ray Carter sent you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn business card. "This has my number. If you need anything, day or night, call. But only in an emergency." Michael took the card with trembling fingers. "Why are you helping me?" Ray met his eyes in the rearview mirror. "Because someone once helped me when I needed it most." He nodded toward the door. "Go. Quickly." Michael hesitated for just a moment, then slipped out of the cab and disappeared through the door. Ray waited until he saw a light flicker briefly in an upstairs window, Sister Agnes's signal that the package had been received safely. He pulled away slowly, taking a circuitous route back to his regular route. But he'd only made it 3 blocks when he spotted them, 4 men in red jackets, lounging against a black SUV at his usual taxi stand. Ray recognized their leader immediately, Damon Rodriguez, the Iron Blade's rising star. His face had been in the police bulletins Ray still received from old contacts. For a moment, Ray considered driving past, but that would only delay the inevitable. Instead, he pulled into his usual spot, his movements unhurried and deliberate. Damon pushed off from the SUV, a smile playing at his lips that didn't reach his eyes. 2 of his men flanked him as he approached the taxi. Ray rolled down his window, his expression neutral. "Evening," Ray said quietly. "Need a ride?" "Funny man." Damon leaned down, his gold chain catching the streetlight. "We're looking for someone. Young guy, beat up pretty bad. Might have taken a taxi from Maple Street about an hour ago." Ray's face remained impassive. "I pick up a lot of fares. Hard to keep track." "Really?" Damon's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Because our friend Marco swears he saw your cab in that area. Says you picked up our missing friend." "Marco should get his eyes checked," Ray replied mildly. "I've been running airport runs all night. Just got back to start my local route." One of Damon's men, a hulking figure with a scar across his neck, stepped forward. "You calling Marco a liar?" Now, Jorge," Damon held up a hand. "Our friend here is just being careful." "Smart man." He studied Ray's face. "You've been driving these streets a long time, haven't you? Never caused any trouble. Never seen anything you shouldn't." "I just drive the cab," Ray said. "Of course you do." Damon straightened up. "And that's smart. Safe. Would be a shame if something happened to change that." His eyes hardened. "If you see our friend, Michael Torres is his name, let him know we're concerned about him. Want to make sure he's safe." "I'll keep that in mind," Ray said, his tone giving away nothing. Damon held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded to his men. As they turned to leave, Ray heard him mutter to Jorge, "Watch this one. Something's not right about him." Ray waited until they'd driven away before allowing his shoulders to relax slightly. He reached under his seat, feeling for a hidden latch that opened a small compartment. Inside lay a burner phone he hadn't touched in years, maintained but never used. Until now. He powered it on, the green display illuminating his face in the darkness. His fingers moved automatically, typing in a number he'd memorized long ago. "Sister Agnes? It's Ray." "Yes, he made it. But listen, they'll be watching the shelter. We need to move him tomorrow." He paused, listening. "I understand the risks. But this is different. Trust me." After ending the call, Ray accessed his cab's dashcam system. Modern taxis had cheap cameras aimed at the passengers, but Ray's setup was military-grade, multiple angles, high resolution, and backed up to a secure server. He reviewed the footage of his conversation with Damon, studying their faces, memorizing details. As he watched, his mind drifted back to another confrontation, 15 years ago. The diplomatic reception hall gleamed with polished marble and crystal chandeliers. Ray stood at his post, every inch the perfect Secret Service agent in his dark suit and earpiece. But his eyes never stopped moving, cataloging every face, every movement. "Carter," his partner's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Got movement in the southeast corridor." "Copy that, Williams," Ray murmured, already moving. His steps were unhurried but purposeful as he made his way through the crowd of diplomats and dignitaries. The man appeared suddenly, a server who hadn't been on the approved list. Ray caught the telltale bulge of a weapon just as the man reached for his jacket. What happened next was a blur of motion. Ray moved with practiced precision, disarming the assassin before he could draw his weapon. The entire confrontation lasted less than 10 seconds, and most of the party guests never even noticed. But Ray remembered every detail: the weight of the gun he'd taken, the look in the assassin's eyes, the way his own heart had remained steady throughout. The memory faded as Ray focused back on the present. He studied his face in the rearview mirror, older now, grayer at the temples, but his eyes were the same. Alert, ready. The confrontation with Damon had awakened something he'd tried to bury. That familiar tension in his muscles, the heightened awareness of his surroundings, the strategic planning happening automatically in the back of his mind. Ray's phone buzzed, a regular fare requesting pickup. He took a deep breath, centering himself. For now, he was still just a cab driver, nothing more. But as he pulled away from the curb, he knew things had changed. The iron blades had marked him, and sooner or later, they'd be back. His right hand flexed unconsciously, the scar tissue catching the streetlight. Ray had spent years building this quiet life, becoming invisible. But as he drove through the darkened streets of East Bridge, he realized that sometimes the past doesn't just catch up to you. Sometimes it shows you exactly who you need to be. The burner phone sat heavy in his pocket, a reminder of the resources still at his disposal. The dashcam footage was already uploaded, safely archived. And somewhere in the city, a young man was alive because Ray Carter had chosen to act instead of look away. As he picked up his next passenger, an overnight nurse heading to her shift, Ray maintained his careful facade of normalcy. But beneath that calm exterior, plans were already forming. The iron blades had just made their first mistake. They'd shown their hand without realizing who they were really dealing with. Ray Carter might be just a cab driver now, but he hadn't forgotten who he used to be. And if Damon and his gang pushed this further, they'd learn that lesson the hard way. The morning sun hadn't yet cleared the horizon when Ray Carter stepped out of his apartment building, travel mug of coffee in hand. He stopped dead in his tracks, the steam from his cup rising into the cool dawn air as he took in the sight before him. His taxi sat where he'd left it the night before, but it was barely recognizable. All 4 tires had been slashed, the rubber hanging in ribbons from the rims. Crimson spray paint covered the yellow panels, the iron blade signature dripping blade symbol prominently displayed on the hood. Crude threats had been scrawled across the windows in harsh, angular letters. Ray took a slow sip of his coffee, his face betraying nothing as he surveyed the damage. A few early morning passers-by hurried past, carefully avoiding eye contact. No one wanted to be a witness these days. He pulled out his phone and dialed the police non-emergency number, more out of procedure than hope. 20 minutes later, Officer Pete Ramirez arrived, looking tired and disinterested as he flipped open his notepad. "Another vandalism case, huh?" Ramirez didn't even look at the car as he started filling out the form. "Let me guess, you didn't see anything?" "I was asleep," Ray replied evenly. "But the gang tags are pretty clear." Ramirez glanced up, his expression hardening slightly. "Gang tags? Looks like regular graffiti to me. Probably just some kids." "Kids don't usually carry box cutters to slash tires," Ray pointed out quietly. "Listen, Mr. Carter," Ramirez lowered his voice, glancing around. "We both know who did this. But unless you've got video evidence or witnesses willing to testify," he shrugged. "Best I can do is file it as vandalism. Insurance might cover the damage. Ray watched as the officer hurriedly finished his report and walked away, his shoulders tense. The message was clear. The police weren't going to help. They're getting bolder. Ray turned to find Mr. Patel, owner of the corner store, standing nearby. The older man's face was creased with worry as he looked at the vandalized taxi. "First time they've targeted you directly," Mr. Patel continued, nervously adjusting his glasses. "Must have done something to catch Damon's attention. You know him?" Ray asked carefully. Mr. Patel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Everyone knows Damon Rodriguez. He started as a street thug, but he's different from the others. Smart. Ruthless. Last store owner who stood up to him disappeared. Police found his car at the airport 2 weeks later. Said he'd fled the country." He gave Ray a meaningful look. "But everyone knows people don't just flee from Damon." Ray nodded slowly, filing away the information. "Thanks for the warning, Mr. Patel. Be careful, my friend. You're a good man. We don't have many of those left in this neighborhood." As Mr. Patel walked away, Ray called his insurance company and arranged for a tow truck. He'd need to rent a replacement cab for a few days, but his mind was already working on other preparations. Throughout the day, as Ray drove his rented taxi through his usual routes, he noticed them, Iron Blades members positioned at strategic corners, watching his movements. They weren't trying to be subtle anymore. A red motorcycle would trail him for a few blocks, then be replaced by a car with tinted windows. Sometimes they'd park across from his regular stops, making sure he saw them. The constant surveillance triggered memories Ray had tried hard to suppress. 15 years ago, prod. "Package is secure," Ray whispered into his comm unit, guiding the Lebanese diplomat through the back corridors of the embassy. Intelligence had confirmed a credible assassination threat, and Ray's team had been tasked with the extraction. "Copy that," his partner David Williams responded. "Exit route clear." 2 minutes to. Static burst through the comm. "Williams." Ray's grip tightened on the diplomat's arm. "Report status." More static. Then a burst of gunfire echoed through the halls. "Go." Ray shoved the diplomat behind a marble pillar as bullets chipped the stone around them. 3 shooters emerged from the shadows, their movements precise and coordinated. What happened next was a blur of violence and skill. Ray moved with practiced efficiency, neutralizing the threats while keeping his body between the attackers and the diplomat. But even as he fought, he knew something was wrong. This was too easy, too obvious. "Williams, respond." Ray hissed into his comm as he hurried the diplomat toward the extraction point. Still nothing. They found Williams at the secondary exit. He'd identified the real threat, a second team approaching from the rear, and had engaged them alone to buy Ray time. His last act had been to eliminate the enemy's sniper, but the cost. The diplomat survived. Williams didn't. And Ray carried that weight with him when he turned in his badge 6 months later. The memory faded as Ray pulled up to the hospital to pick up Sarah Martinez from her shift. The red motorcycle that had been following him for the last hour idled across the street. "You okay?" Sarah asked as she slid into the back seat. "You look tired." "Long day," Ray replied, pulling away from the curb. In his mirror, he watched the motorcycle fall into position behind them. That evening, after his shift, Ray made several stops. First to an electronics store where he purchased a sophisticated camera system, small, wireless units that could be hidden around his cab and apartment. Then to a hardware store for supplies to reinforce his doors and windows. Simple preparations, nothing that would draw attention, but necessary. He was installing the last camera in his cab when a shadow fell across him. Ray didn't need to turn around to know who it was. He'd heard the heavy footsteps approaching, smelled the cigarette smoke. "Jorge," Ray said calmly, continuing his work. "Expected you sooner." Damon's enforcer, the man with the scarred neck, moved into view. His massive frame blocked out the streetlight. "Damon sends his regards." Jorge's voice was a gravelly rumble. "Says you should take better care of your ride. Shame what happened to it. Very kind of him to be concerned. He's also concerned about your memory." Jorge leaned closer. "Seems you forgot our conversation about that kid, Michael. Funny thing, sister at the shelter says a cab driver dropped him off. Described you perfectly." Ray finally turned to face him. "Lot of cab drivers in this city. Not many as stupid as you." Jorge's hand dropped to his waist, where the outline of a weapon was visible under his jacket. "Damon says to deliver a message. Stay out of our business. Next time won't be just your cab. Ray met his eyes steadily. Message received. Jorge held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows between buildings. Once he was alone, Ray retrieved his burner phone and began reviewing the footage from his new cameras. He positioned them carefully throughout the day, mapping the iron blade's movements, their routines, their habits. Already patterns were emerging. They were organized, he had to give them that. They operated in shifts, maintained regular communication, and showed basic tactical awareness. But they also had weaknesses. Their radio discipline was sloppy. He'd picked up fragments of their conversations throughout the day. Their surveillance patterns were predictable, and they left blind spots in their coverage. Most importantly, they were overconfident. They thought they were dealing with a simple cab driver, and that arrogance would be their downfall. Ray was making notes on their patrol patterns when his burner phone vibrated. The number was blocked, but he knew who it would be. Michael. Ray? The young man's voice was shaky. I'm sorry to call, but something's wrong. Sister Agnes says there are men watching the shelter. They've been there all day. Ray's jaw tightened. Are you safe right now? Yes, but Sister Agnes says I need to move. She has a place lined up in another city, but Michael's voice dropped even lower. Ray, they found my mom's house. Left a message. They said they know where my little sister goes to school. Ray closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision before him. He could walk away, should walk away. He'd built this quiet life carefully, deliberately, staying off the radar. Getting involved would mean stepping back into a world he'd left behind, risking everything he'd built. But he thought of Mrs. Chun hurrying past gang tags with her head down, of Sarah Martinez clutching Tommy's hand as they crossed the street, of Mr. Patel's worried face as he warned about Damon's ruthlessness. Listen carefully, Ray said finally. I want you to stay put tonight. Don't tell anyone I called, not even Sister Agnes. Tomorrow morning, things are going to change. What do you mean? The Iron Blades think they run this neighborhood because no one stands up to them. Ray's voice hardened slightly. Time they learned that's not true anymore. After ending the call, Ray sat in his cab for a long moment, watching the street through his windshield. Somewhere in the distance, police sirens wailed, and the sound seemed to echo his own internal warning bells. He tried to stay invisible, to just be another face in the crowd. But as he watched a young mother hurry past his cab, clutching her child's hand and glancing nervously at the gang tags that marked the Iron Blades territory, Ray knew he couldn't maintain that fiction any longer. The quiet life he'd built was comfortable, safe. But comfort wasn't what this neighborhood needed right now. It needed someone who knew how to fight back. Someone who understood the tactical games being played in its shadows. Ray started his cab's engine, his decision made. As he pulled away from the curb, his eyes caught a glimpse of the faded Secret Service badge still hidden in his glove compartment. He'd walked away from that life once, believing he could leave it all behind. But some skills, once learned, never really leave you. And sometimes, the very thing you're running from turns out to be exactly what's needed. The Iron Blades had made their warning clear. Now it was time for Ray Carter to send one of his own. The pre-dawn air was thick with tension as Ray pulled into his usual spot at the taxi stand. He'd been expecting this confrontation. The way the Iron Blades had been circling him all week, it was inevitable. Still, seeing 3 black SUVs box in his cab made his pulse quicken, if only slightly. Damon Rodriguez emerged from the middle vehicle, flanked by Jorge and 4 other enforcers. Their red jackets seemed to glow in the dim street lighting, marking them as predators in the urban jungle. But Ray had faced worse odds before. Step out of the car, Damon called, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there in their previous encounter. Ray took his time, methodically turning off his engine and removing his keys before stepping out. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, the kind of calm that comes from absolute control rather than fear. Quite a welcome committee, Ray observed mildly, leaning against his cab's hood. Must be a slow morning. Jorge stepped forward, his massive frame tense for violence, but Damon held up a hand. Where's Michael Torres? Oh, don't play dumb. Damon's smile was razor-sharp. We know you took him to Sister Agnes's shelter. But now he's gone. Vanished. Like magic. Ray's expression remained neutral. Sounds like he's smarter than you gave him credit for. Maybe, Damon stepped closer, his gold chain glinting. Or maybe someone's helping him. Someone who doesn't understand how things work in East Bridge. How do things work? Ray asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Enlighten me. The question seemed to catch Damon off guard. He studied Ray's face, searching for fear or sarcasm, but finding neither. This is our territory. We protect it. Keep order. Anyone who disrupts that order. He let the threat hang in the air. Interesting philosophy. Ray nodded thoughtfully. Though I seem to remember a different definition of protection from my dictionary. Jorge growled, taking another step forward. Boss, let me teach this smart mouth. Your dictionary? Damon interrupted, his eyes narrowing. There's something about you, Carter. The way you move, the way you talk. You're not just some cab driver, are you? Ray smiled slightly. Maybe I'm just someone who's seen enough to know the difference between protection and persecution. Last chance, Damon's voice hardened. Where's Torres? Gone, Ray replied simply. Beyond your reach. But here's a question you should be asking yourself. Why does one scared kid matter so much? Unless... He paused, watching Damon's reaction. Unless you're not as in control as you pretend to be. The words hit home. Damon's face darkened, and this time he didn't stop Jorge from stepping forward. But before the enforcer could reach him, Ray spoke again. Think carefully about your next move. His voice carried a quiet authority that made even Jorge hesitate. Violence has consequences. Sometimes not the ones you expect. Something in his tone, perhaps the absolute certainty behind it, made Damon pull Jorge back. Watch him, he ordered his men. Every move, every passenger, every stop. I want to know everything. As the gang members returned to their vehicles, Ray called out, You know where to find me. I'll be right here, doing my job. The SUVs pulled away, but Ray knew this was just the beginning. Sure enough, within an hour, he spotted the first tail, a red motorcycle keeping pace 3 cars back. By noon, they'd established a rotating surveillance pattern, 2 vehicles at a time, switching every few hours. Ray used their attention to his advantage, maintaining his regular routes while mentally mapping their movements. They were aggressive but predictable, more focused on intimidation than effective surveillance. It made their blind spots easy to identify. He was dropping off a fare when he spotted them, 3 Iron Blades members surrounding Mr. Patel outside his store. The old man's face was ashen as they pressed him against the wall. Ray didn't hesitate. He pulled up to the curb, horn blaring in 3 short bursts, a police signal he remembered from his training days. The gang members scattered instantly, conditioned to fear law enforcement despite their growing boldness. You okay? Ray asked as Mr. Patel straightened his glasses with trembling hands. Yes, they were just... The shop owner glanced nervously down the street. Making sure I understood about their protection fees. Call this number if they come back. Ray handed him a card. Ask for Detective Morrison. Say you want to report a robbery in progress. Mr. Patel took the card, confused. But they're not robbing. Morrison will understand. Trust me. After ensuring Mr. Patel was safely inside, Ray made his way to a quiet diner in a different part of town. A woman in a crisp business suit sat alone in a corner booth, reading a newspaper. Despite the 15 years since he'd last seen her, Catherine Morrison hadn't changed much. You're late, she said without looking up as Ray slid into the booth. Had to lose my tail. Iron Blades are getting sloppy with their surveillance. Catherine folded her newspaper, her eyes sharp. Wouldn't know. Gang activity isn't my department anymore. But information still is. Ray placed a thumb drive on the table. 2 weeks of surveillance footage. License plates, faces, drop locations. Thought you might find it interesting. I'm retired, Ray. Just like you. Are you? He met her gaze steadily. Because my sources say you're running a task force on organized crime. Off the books, of course. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Your sources being? Let's just say some of us keep in touch better than others. The memory hit him suddenly, another time, another place. Again. Ray barked, watching the trainee agents circle each other on the mat. Phillips, watch your footwork. Martinez, guard those ribs. The training room at Quantico hummed with activity as Ray put his class through their paces. Close-quarters combat was his specialty, the perfect blend of technique and instinct that had saved his life more times than he could count. Remember, He demonstrated a complex takedown move, his movements fluid and precise. Your opponent's strength can be their weakness. Use their momentum, their expectations against them. The best victory is the one where you never throw a punch. Catherine's voice brought him back to the present. You're playing a dangerous game, Ray. The Iron Blades aren't just some street gang anymore. They've got connections, protection from people who should know better. Ray finished. That's what interests me. A local gang suddenly expanding their territory, showing military-grade tactical awareness. Someone's backing them, Catherine. Someone's using them. She studied him for a long moment before taking the thumb drive. I'll look into it. But Ray, her expression softened slightly. Be careful. You've been out of the game a long time. Not as long as they think. Over the next few days, Ray methodically documented the gang's operations. His cab's cameras captured their patrol routes, identified their safe houses, and logged their regular meeting spots. He began to recognize patterns, which enforcers worked together, who reported directly to Damon, where they stored their merchandise. But his activities hadn't gone unnoticed. The Iron Blade surveillance became more aggressive, their presence more threatening. Ray knew they were building to something, but he didn't expect them to target Mrs. Chun. He was waiting at her usual pickup spot when he heard the scream. Ray found her surrounded by 3 gang members in the market's parking lot, her shopping cart overturned, vegetables scattered across the asphalt. Please, she was saying, her voice trembling. I don't want any trouble. Should have thought about that before getting in Carter's cab, one of them sneered, reaching for her purse. Ray moved without thinking, years of training taking over. His voice cut through the pre-dawn air like a whip. Step away from her. The gang members turned, their faces splitting into cruel grins as they recognized him. The largest one, Ray recognized him as one of Damon's newer recruits, cracked his knuckles. Perfect timing. Boss wants us to send you a message. What followed was brutal and quick. Ray managed to keep them away from Mrs. Chun, but he was outnumbered, and they were armed with brass knuckles and pipes. He took down 2 of them with precise strikes to vulnerable points, but the third caught him from behind. The beating was methodical, designed to hurt rather than permanently damage. Through it all, Ray kept his body between them and Mrs. Chun, who was screaming for help that wouldn't come. When they finally left, Ray's cab had been demolished, windows shattered, body dented, engine smoking. He lay on the cold pavement, tasting blood, hearing Mrs. Chen's soft sobs as she tried to help him up. Ray, oh Ray, why did you? It's okay, he managed, though his ribs screamed in protest as he sat up. Are you hurt? Me? No, but you. We must call police, hospital. No. Ray's voice was firm despite his injuries. No police. No hospital. He pulled out his phone, somehow undamaged, and dialed a number. Sister Agnes? I need a favor. 2 hours later, Ray sat in Sister Agnes's small office as she cleaned his wounds. His body was a map of bruises and cuts, but nothing was broken. He'd had worse. You can't keep doing this alone, Sister Agnes said quietly, applying antiseptic to a cut above his eye. I'm not alone, Ray replied, wincing slightly. I have you, Catherine. The community. The community is scared, Ray. And you're just one man. He thought of Mrs. Chen's terrified face, of Michael Torres hiding from threats to his family, of Mr. Patel's trembling hands. Sometimes one man is enough. If he's the right man, at the right time. Sister Agnes stepped back, studying his face. And you think you're that man? Ray stood carefully, testing his injuries. Each movement sent fresh waves of pain through his body, but with the pain came clarity. He'd been holding back, trying to maintain his cover, as just another cab driver. That ended today. I've spent years hiding who I am, what I can do, he said quietly, telling myself it was safer that way. But there's a difference between being safe and being right. He walked to the window, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and shadow. Somewhere out there, Damon and his Iron Blades thought they'd taught him a lesson. They thought they'd shown him the cost of defiance. What they'd actually done was remind him of who he really was. Not just Ray Carter the cab driver, but Ray Carter the Secret Service agent. The man who'd spent years protecting others from exactly the kind of predators who now stalked his streets. They want to play rough. Ray's reflection in the window showed a man transformed, no longer hiding, no longer pretending. Time to show them what rough really means. Sister Agnes crossed herself quietly. God help them. God helps those who help themselves, Ray replied, already planning his next move. And it's time this neighborhood helped itself. The sun cleared the horizon, casting long shadows across Eastbridge. In a few hours, Ray would need to make arrangements for a new cab, file insurance claims, maintain his cover. But for now, he allowed himself to embrace what he'd been denying for so long. The skills, the training, the instincts that had once made him one of the best. The Iron Blades had just made their biggest mistake. They'd pushed him past the point of watching and waiting. Now, they would learn what it meant to face someone who knew their game better than they did. Ray touched his ribs gently, feeling the damage. Each bruise, each cut was a reminder of why he'd chosen this life, and why he now chose to step back into the shadows he'd left behind. Not as a victim, but as a hunter. The quiet life was over. The real work was about to begin. The auto repair shop's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Ray's taxi as he worked. It was well past midnight, but Pete Martinez, Sarah's brother and owner of Martinez Auto Body, had given him the keys and privacy he needed. The cab's body damage had been repaired during regular hours, but what Ray was installing now required discretion. Third camera goes here, Ray muttered to himself, carefully concealing a pinhole lens behind the rearview mirror. The system was military-grade, courtesy of Catherine Morrison's connections, multiple angles, infrared capability, and a direct upload to a secure server. He'd also reinforced the doors with lightweight armor panels and installed bulletproof glass in the windows. To anyone else, it would look like a normal cab that had been repaired after a vandalism incident. But Ray was done being vulnerable. Dawn was breaking by the time he finished. Ray drove home, his body aching from the night's work, but his mind already focusing on the next phase of his preparation. In his apartment, Ray pushed the furniture against the walls, creating an open space in the center of his living room. He stood barefoot on the hardwood floor, closing his eyes as he settled into a familiar stance. His muscles remembered, even after all these years. The first movements were slow, deliberate, basic forms he'd learned decades ago. But as his body warmed up, the sequences became more complex. Strikes flowed into blocks, throws merged with sweeps. Ray moved through the patterns with fluid precision, his breathing controlled and steady. He'd been maintaining this routine every morning for the past week, rebuilding strength and muscle memory. The bruises from his beating were still tender, but he worked through the pain, using it to fuel his focus. His burner phone buzzed, another anonymous tip to the police about Iron Blade's activity. He'd been strategic about these reports, targeting small operations, creating confusion and discord within their ranks. Nothing big enough to draw major attention, but enough to keep them off balance. As Ray continued his training, his mind drifted back to another time, another mission. Team 2 in position. Ray's voice was barely a whisper in the comm unit. Around him, 6 agents waited in perfect silence, their black tactical gear blending with the shadows of the Venezuelan embassy. Intelligence had confirmed a plot to assassinate 3 diplomats during a closed-door meeting. But rather than evacuate the targets, Ray had proposed a more ambitious plan. Use the attempt to expose the entire network. Team 1 status? He asked. Ready, came the response. Package is moving. Ray checked his watch. Everything hinged on precise timing and absolute trust in his team. He'd trained them himself, knew their capabilities intimately. Remember, he said quietly, we're not just stopping an assassination. We're sending a message. Make it clean. What followed was a masterclass in coordinated action. As the assassination team breached the embassy's security, Ray's teams moved like perfectly positioned chess pieces, herding the threats into prepared containment zones. When it was over, 16 conspirators were in custody, and not a single shot had been fired. Impressive work, his supervisor had said later. They never saw it coming. The best victories, Ray had replied, are the ones where the enemy defeats themselves. The memory faded as Ray completed his training sequence. He was older now, but the principles remained the same. Strategy, patience, using the enemy's strength against them. His phone buzzed again, a text from one of his regular passengers. Damon's enforcers had been asking questions about him, watching his usual pickup spots with increasing intensity. Ray wasn't surprised. Over the past week, his subtle campaign had been causing the Iron Blades problems. Small shipments went missing. Police showed up at their collection points. Security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned during their operations. He was reviewing footage from his cab's new cameras when something caught his attention. Two of Damon's lieutenants, speaking in what they thought was privacy. Bigger than usual shipment. Girls from overseas. Warehouse on River Street. Ray's blood ran cold. Human trafficking. The pieces started falling into place. The increased security, the new tactical awareness, the pressure to recruit young men like Michael Torres. The Iron Blades were evolving from street gang to something far more sinister. He reached for his burner phone, dialing Catherine's number. "I need everything you have on River Street warehouses," he said without preamble. Specifically any owned by shell companies or with unusual security upgrades in the past 6 months. "Hello to you too, Ray." Catherine's voice was dry. "Your campaign of harassment causing you trouble. This is bigger than harassment. They're moving people, Catherine. Young women." A pause. "That's a serious accusation. I have footage. Partial conversations. It fits the pattern. Why they're so desperate to maintain control of their territory. Why they're recruiting aggressively. I'll look into it," Catherine said finally. "But Ray, if this is what you think it is, you're going to need help." "Already working on it." Over the next few days, Ray began noticing subtle changes in the neighborhood. Shop owners met his eyes more directly. People stopped avoiding his cab. Small gestures appeared. A free coffee here. A warning about gang movements there. Mr. Patel summed it up best. "People are talking, Ray. They see what you're doing. Small things, yes, but it gives them hope." The Iron Blades noticed too. Their surveillance became more aggressive, but also more nervous. Twice Ray spotted their lookouts breaking position when he approached. They were starting to realize he wasn't just watching them. He was hunting them. Damon's paranoia manifested in increasingly erratic decisions. He ordered his men to maintain 24-hour surveillance on Ray, stretching his resources thin. When shipments went missing, he accused his own lieutenants of betrayal. Ray encouraged this paranoia with carefully placed evidence. A burner phone left where they would find it, containing cryptic text messages. Security camera footage of their operations anonymously mailed to their rivals. Small signs that someone was always watching, always one step ahead. In his apartment, Ray prepared for the confrontation he knew was coming. A duffel bag under his bed contained non-lethal but effective tools. Flashbang grenades modified to disorient rather than harm. Zip ties reinforced to military specifications. Smoke canisters that could provide cover without causing permanent damage. He wasn't going to kill anyone. That wasn't his way. But he was going to stop them, and he was going to do it in a way that would ensure they stayed stopped. One evening, as Ray was installing the last of his surveillance equipment, Sarah Martinez approached his cab. Her expression was worried, but determined. "Ray," she said quietly, "people are saying things about you. That you're standing up to them. That you're different than we thought." "People say a lot of things," Ray replied neutrally. "Tommy's teacher mentioned that the gang members who used to hang around the school are gone. Mr. Patel says his protection payments have mysteriously disappeared from his shop's regular expenses." "Mrs. Chun." Sarah paused, smiling slightly. "Mrs. Chun says you're an angel in disguise." Ray continued his work, but he was listening carefully. "I'm not asking questions," Sarah continued. "I don't want to know details. But, whatever you're doing, the neighborhood is changing. People are starting to believe things can be different. Change is inevitable," Ray said quietly. "The question is whether we let others control that change, or take control ourselves." Sarah nodded, then reached into her purse. "This is from the Neighborhood Watch Group. We've been keeping track of suspicious activities, writing down license plates, taking pictures when we can." She handed him a thumb drive. "Maybe it'll help." Ray took the drive, understanding its significance. The community wasn't just passively supporting him anymore. They were actively joining the fight. Later that night, Ray sat in his cab, parked in the shadows near one of the Iron Blade's regular meeting spots. His new cameras recorded everything as Damon arrived, looking agitated as he berated his lieutenants. "Someone's playing us," Damon's voice came clearly through Ray's directional microphone. "Making us look weak. The Colombians are getting nervous about the shipment." "Could be the cops," one lieutenant suggested. "No," Damon shook his head. "This is different. More personal. That cab driver. Carter? He's nothing. Just some old man who appears everywhere we have problems. Damon exploded. Who never seems surprised by anything. Who fights like he's at training. He grabbed his lieutenant's collar. Find out who he really is. What he really wants. And when you do, Ray had heard enough. He started his engine, pulling away silently. In his rearview mirror, he saw Damon's head snap up at the sound, his face contorting with rage as he recognized the cab. Time was running out. The Iron Blade's human trafficking operation would be happening soon, and when it did, Ray needed to be ready. He had the tools, the intelligence, and now the community's support. But he also knew that Damon was becoming desperate, and desperate men were unpredictable. Back in his apartment, Ray began laying out his equipment. Each item was carefully selected, tested, and modified to serve his purposes without causing permanent harm. He wasn't out for revenge. This was about protection, about restoring balance to a community that had lived too long in fear. As he worked, Ray thought about all the people who had entrusted him with their stories, their fears, their hope for something better. Mrs. Chun and her quiet dignity. Sarah Martinez and her determination to give Tommy a better life. Michael Torres and his refusal to be corrupted. They deserve more than just survival. They deserve to live without fear, to walk their streets with pride, to build the kind of community that lifted people up instead of grinding them down. The Iron Blades thought they were the predators in this urban jungle. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that looks like prey, the one that watches and waits and knows exactly when to strike. Ray Carter had spent years building his quiet life, becoming invisible. But as he prepared for the coming confrontation, he realized that true strength isn't in hiding who you are. It's in choosing when to reveal it. The breaking point had arrived. Now it was time to show the Iron Blades exactly who they were dealing with. Ray Carter stood in the shadows of his apartment, eyes closed, as memories he'd long suppressed came flooding back. Washington, D.C., 12 years ago. All units, Hawkeye is moving. Ray's voice was steady as he coordinated the protective detail from his position in the lead vehicle. The president's motorcade wound through the Capitol streets, a choreographed dance of armored vehicles and hidden security measures. Package is secure, came the response from Williams, his partner. East corridor clear. Ray scanned the rooftops, windows, and crowds with practiced efficiency. 15 years in the Secret Service had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. He'd protected presidents, foreign dignitaries, and high-level officials across 4 continents. His record was impeccable until Prague. The memory shifted, fragments of different missions blending together. A thwarted assassination attempt in Buenos Aires, where Ray had spotted the threat by noticing a street vendor's unusual posture. A bombing prevented in Cairo because he'd recognized the subtle signs of a device in a parked car. The night in Singapore when he'd led his team through a typhoon to extract a compromised asset. You have a gift, Carter, his supervisor had told him once. You see patterns others miss. You understand how threats think. Another shift, and he was in the White House Situation Room, briefing his team before a high-risk operation. Remember, he told them, our job isn't just protection. It's prevention. We stop threats before they become actions. We see what others don't want us to see. And we never, ever let them know we're coming. The memories faded as Ray opened his eyes, focusing on the present. Those lessons from his past were about to become very relevant again. He checked his watch, 2:15 a.m. The Iron Blades hideout on Mason Street would be minimally staffed now. Ray had spent days observing their patterns, noting shift changes and security protocols. Tonight he would put that intelligence to use. Moving silently through the pre-dawn darkness, Ray approached the converted warehouse from its blind side. His black clothing helped him blend with the shadows, and years of training made his movements nearly silent. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter, sloppy, predictable patterns that left gaps in their coverage. Ray timed their movements, slipping through their patrol route during a 40-second window when both guards were focused elsewhere. The lock on the side door was basic. He had it open in seconds. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit. Ray moved like a ghost, using the shadows and stored crates as cover. His trained eye cataloged everything: security camera positions, guard rotations, and most importantly, evidence of their operations. In an office above the main floor, Ray found what he was looking for. Financial records, shipping manifests, and photographs that documented the Iron Blade's expansion into human trafficking. He carefully photographed everything with a specialized camera, making sure to capture the details that would be most useful to law enforcement. But Ray didn't just gather evidence. He left some behind. Micro cameras disguised as dust, strategically placed to capture future activities. A small transmitter that would relay conversations to a secure server. And in Damon's private office, a single playing card left in the center of the desk. The Jack of Spades, with a message written in precise handwriting. The game is changing. He was almost clear when an alarm blared. Not for him, but for something else. Ray pressed himself into a shadow as boots thundered past his position. "Boss wants everyone out," a voice shouted. "Carter's been spotted near the South Side operation." Ray allowed himself a small smile. The diversion he'd arranged, having Sarah Martinez drive his cab past another Iron Blade's location, had worked perfectly, but his satisfaction was short-lived. As he made his way back to where he parked his real cab, headlights suddenly flooded the street. 3 SUVs roared around the corner, and Ray heard Damon's voice. "There he is. Don't let him reach his car." The next few minutes were a blur of motion and calculated risk. Ray sprinted the last few yards to his cab as bullets sparked off the pavement around him. He threw himself behind the wheel, grateful for the bulletproof glass he'd installed as rounds impacted the windows. The engine roared to life, and Ray's world narrowed to the kind of high-speed chess game he'd mastered during his protective detail days. The SUVs had the advantage in power, but his cab was more maneuverable, and he knew these streets intimately. Ray threw the taxi into a tight turn, tires screaming as he threaded between 2 of the pursuing vehicles. His movements were precise, each turn and acceleration carefully calculated to use his pursuers' momentum against them. "Come on, baby," he murmured as the cab fishtailed around another corner. In his rearview mirror, one of the SUVs failed to make the turn, crashing into a row of parked cars. The chase led them through the maze-like streets of East Bridge. Ray used every trick he'd learned in tactical driving courses, feints, reversals, and careful manipulation of sight lines to confuse and separate his pursuers. When he finally lost them, Ray headed for a storage facility on the outskirts of town. Unit 247 looked abandoned, its lock rusted and forgotten, but the key turned smoothly. Inside, sealed cases contained equipment he'd hoped never to need again. Tactical gear, communication devices, and non-lethal weapons he'd accumulated during his service years. As he loaded the gear into his cab, Ray's burner phone buzzed. The number was familiar. Marcus Sullivan, his former teammate from the Secret Service. "Tell me you're not really taking on a street gang by yourself," Marcus said without preamble. "Good to hear from you too," Ray replied, checking the charge on a tactical radio. "How's retirement?" "Better than yours, apparently. Catherine called me. Said you might need backup. I can handle it." "Like you handled Prague?" Ray's hand tightened on the phone. "That was different." "Was it?" Marcus's voice softened slightly. "Ray, I know you. You're not just fighting this gang. You're trying to make up for what happened to Williams. They're trafficking people, Marcus. Young women. I can't just walk away." A long pause. "Give me 12 hours. I could be there with a team." "No team," Ray said firmly. "But I might need someone to watch my back." "I'll be there." "And Ray? Try not to start the war without me." Across town, in his expensively furnished office, Damon Rodriguez was piecing together a puzzle that was becoming increasingly disturbing. Spread across his desk were reports, photographs, and fragments of information about Ray Carter. "It doesn't add up," he muttered, studying a surveillance photo. "The way he moves, the tactics he uses." His eyes narrowed as he focused on Ray's hand in the image, the way his fingers splayed in a distinctive pattern taught to federal agents. A quick internet search confirmed his suspicions. There, in a grainy news photo from 15 years ago, a younger Ray Carter in a dark suit, standing guard during a presidential visit. Son of a... Damon's fist crashed into his desk. He's Secret Service. Jorge, who had been standing quietly in the corner, straightened up. Former Secret Service. Been out for years. Doesn't matter, Damon snarled. He's not just some cab driver. He's a trained federal agent. One who's been watching us, documenting everything. His face darkened as the implication sank in. "What do you want us to do, boss?" Damon stared at the photos, his mind racing. Lock down everything. Double the guards at all locations. And send everyone we have after Carter. I want him found before the shipment arrives. The Iron Blades responded with brutal efficiency. Within hours, their presence in East Bridge became overwhelming. Enforcers patrolled the streets openly, harassing residents and searching vehicles. The message was clear. No one was beyond their reach. But even as they tightened their grip, Ray was making his final preparations. The evidence he gathered painted a clear picture. A major human trafficking operation was imminent. Shipping manifests and coded communications pointed to a warehouse near the river, recently purchased through a shell company. Ray sat in his cab, parked in the shadows near the warehouse, watching through high-powered binoculars. The security was heavy but predictable. Armed guards, regular patrols, and surveillance cameras that left subtle blind spots. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Police raid scheduled for 72 hours from now. Higher-ups finally convinced? Ray's jaw tightened. The shipping manifests indicated the delivery would happen tomorrow night. By the time the police moved in, the victims would be long gone. Another text, this one from Marcus, in position. Southeast corner of the district. Say the word. Ray started his cab's engine, his decision made. The Iron Blades thought they had all the power, all the control. But they were about to learn what real training, real experience looked like. In his rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of the faded Secret Service badge still hidden in his glove compartment. For years, it had been a reminder of a life he'd left behind. Now it was a reminder of who he really was and what he was capable of. The time for hiding was over. Tomorrow night, Ray Carter would show the Iron Blades exactly why they should have left his neighborhood alone. But first, he had preparations to make, a team to coordinate, and a plan to set in motion. As he drove through the darkened streets, Ray's mind was already gaming out scenarios, identifying contingencies, preparing for every possibility. The skills that had once protected presidents and foreign dignitaries would now be used to protect his community. The secret was out, but that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what he would do with it. Ray touched the scar on his palm, the one he'd gotten saving that diplomat in Prague, the night he'd lost Williams. His partner's last words echoed in his memory. Make it count, Ray. Whatever you do next, make it count. Tomorrow night, he would do exactly that. The Iron Blades were about to learn the difference between thugs with guns and a professionally trained federal agent with nothing left to lose. The warehouse district was silent except for the distant sound of waves lapping against the docks. Ray Carter sat in the darkened interior of his cab, monitoring the feeds from the surveillance devices he'd planted around the Iron Blades headquarters. 6 tiny screens showed different angles of the building's exterior and key interior spaces. Guard rotation every 30 minutes, he murmured into his recorder. 2-man teams, overlapping patterns. His eyes narrowed as he noticed something. But they're getting sloppy, tired. Third shift keeps cutting corners on their sweep of the East Corridor. Marcus Sullivan's voice crackled through his earpiece. Just like Bogota. Remember that? Ray did remember. The memory washed over him. Bogota, Colombia, 2008. Teams in position, Ray whispered into his comm unit. Around him, 3 Secret Service tactical teams waited in the pre-dawn darkness. Inside the compound before them, terrorists held 4 American diplomats hostage. Command, we have movement at the North Gate, one of his team leaders reported. Hold position, Ray ordered. He'd spent the last 12 hours studying the compound's security patterns, noting the subtle changes that indicated the guards' declining alertness. Sir, window of opportunity closing, another agent pressed. Wait. Ray's voice was firm. He'd seen this before, the way fatigue made even trained personnel fall into predictable patterns. 3, 2, 1. Right on schedule, the guard patrols split up, one man ducking behind the building for a cigarette. The gap in their coverage lasted exactly 45 seconds. Now, Ray commanded. His teams moved with precision, exploiting the weakness he'd identified. Within minutes, they had penetrated the compound's outer security. The rescue operation became a textbook example of tactical infiltration, studied at Quantico for years afterward. No casualties, all hostages recovered safely, and the entire terrorist cell captured intact. The memory faded as Ray's monitors showed new activity at the warehouse. A black SUV pulled up to the loading dock, and Ray zoomed in on the driver, one of Damon's trusted lieutenants. Marcus, got movement at the south entrance. They're bringing in supplies. Copy that. Catherine's units won't be in position until tomorrow night. Too late, Ray replied, watching as more vehicles arrived. The deal's happening tonight. They're setting up now. He continued monitoring the feeds as the Iron Blades members bustled around the warehouse. His careful observation revealed their logistics setup, security positions, and most importantly, their vulnerabilities. Then something caught his eye, a familiar figure being roughly dragged into the building. No, Ray breathed, zooming in closer. Marcus, they have Michael Torres, the kid you helped before? Must have grabbed him from the shelter. Ray's jaw tightened as he watched Michael, bloody and bruised, being led inside. They're using him as insurance. Ray. Marcus's voice carried a warning. Don't let this cloud your judgment. But Ray was already moving, his mind assembling and discarding plans with practiced efficiency. The warehouse's layout was complex, but he'd studied it thoroughly. He knew its weak points, its blind spots, and, most importantly, how to use them. Over the next hour, Ray carefully positioned his countermeasures. Small devices that would create strategic distractions, electromagnetic pulses to disable security cameras, smoke generators to create confusion, and sonic emitters that would mask the sound of his movement. Starting my approach, he told Marcus, maintain overwatch on the north exit. Ray moved like a shadow through the warehouse's exterior security. His black tactical gear, retrieved from his old equipment cache, helped him blend with the darkness. The first guard never saw him coming. A precise strike to a nerve cluster dropped him silently. The second guard met a similar fate. Ray caught him from behind, using a sleeper hold he'd learned during his Secret Service close-quarters combat training. Both guards would wake up with headaches, but otherwise unharmed. Inside the warehouse, Ray triggered his first distraction, a small electromagnetic pulse that knocked out the security cameras in the East Wing. As predicted, it drew the attention of several guards. What the hell? One of them growled into his radio. Cameras are down in Sector 4. Check the breaker box, came the response. Ray waited until they moved to investigate, then slipped past their position. His movements were fluid, practiced, the result of thousands of hours of training and real-world experience. He could hear Damon's voice echoing from somewhere above. I want everything perfect when the buyers arrive. No mistakes. Another guard rounded a corner, but Ray was ready. A quick combination, strike to the solar plexus, sweep of the legs, controlled takedown, and another threat was neutralized. He zip-tied the guard's hands and feet, then moved on. The warehouse's interior was a maze of shipping containers and storage rooms. Ray's intelligence suggested the trafficking victims would be held in the basement level. But first he needed to find Michael. A burst of static in his earpiece. Ray, Damon's getting nervous. His men keep reporting equipment failures and missing guards. Good, Ray replied softly. Keep him nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. He triggered another distraction, this time a smoke generator in the loading bay. Shouts of confusion echoed through the building as guards rushed to investigate. Ray used the chaos to make his way to the lower level. The lock on the basement door was industrial grade, but he made quick work of it with tools from his kit. Inside, he found what he was looking for, and his blood ran cold. A dozen young women huddled in a makeshift cell, their eyes wide with fear. Ray held a finger to his lips, then quickly picked the lock on their cage. I'm here to help, he whispered in English, then repeated it in Spanish and Mandarin. But we need to be quiet. A sound from the corner caught his attention. Michael Torres was chained to a pipe, his face swollen from a recent beating. But his eyes lit up with recognition when he saw Ray. You came, Michael whispered. Of course I did. Ray made quick work of the chains. Can you walk? Michael nodded, though he winced as he stood. They caught me yesterday. Been trying to make me tell them about you. What did you tell them? A ghost of a smile crossed Michael's battered face. That you're just a cab driver. They didn't like that answer much. Ray helped Michael steady himself, then turned to the women. We're going to get you out of here, but you need to follow my instructions exactly. He had just finished explaining the escape route when his earpiece crackled urgently. Ray, movement on the upper floor. Damon's heading down with at least 6 men. They know something's wrong. Ray could hear boots on the stairs. Heavy, determined footsteps. He quickly positioned himself near the door, motioning for everyone to stay quiet. Check every room. Damon's voice carried down the hallway. Find out what's going on. The women pressed themselves against the back wall, while Michael braced himself behind a stack of crates. Ray's hand tightened on his non-lethal weapon as he prepared for the confrontation he knew was coming. The door burst open, and Jorge stepped through, gun raised. His eyes widened as he recognized Ray, but before he could shout a warning, everything happened at once. Damon appeared in the doorway, flanked by his enforcers. His face contorted with rage as he took in the scene. The freed captives, Michael's presence, and Ray standing calmly in the center of it all. You, Damon snarled, raising his weapon. I should have known. Ray's voice was steady, almost conversational. Last chance, Damon. Walk away. A harsh laugh. You're outnumbered, unarmed, and trapped. Exactly what do you think is going to happen here? Ray allowed himself a small smile. I think you're about to learn the difference between thugs with guns and someone who's spent their life training for exactly this kind of situation. The tension in the room was electric as both sides prepared for what would come next. Through his earpiece, Ray could hear Marcus repositioning for a better angle. The women huddled together, watching with terrified eyes. Michael tensed, ready to move despite his injuries. And Ray Carter, former Secret Service agent turned cab driver, stood his ground as years of training, experience, and carefully laid plans came together for one decisive moment. The warehouse basement crackled with tension as Damon Rodriguez faced Ray Carter, their standoff illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights. A dozen frightened trafficking victims huddled against the far wall, while Michael Torres watched from behind a stack of crates, his face swollen but determined. Agent Raymond Carter, Damon sneered, his gold chain glinting as he moved. 15 years with the Secret Service. Distinguished record until Prague. His lips curled into a cruel smile. That's when you lost your partner, right? Williams, wasn't it? Ray's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened slightly. You've been doing your homework. Had to know who was causing us so much trouble. Damon gestured to his enforcers, who spread out around the room. Though I have to say, I'm disappointed. The legendary Agent Carter, reduced to driving a taxi and playing hero in a neighborhood nobody cares about. That's where you're wrong, Ray replied calmly. People do care. Your own people are starting to care too. He nodded toward one of the younger gang members, whose gun hand trembled slightly. They're wondering why their fearless leader is trafficking women instead of protecting the neighborhood like he promised. Damon's smile faltered. My people are loyal. Are they? Ray's voice carried just enough doubt to plant seeds of uncertainty. Jorge here has been making calls to rival gangs. Martinez in accounting has been talking to the FBI. Even your right-hand man, Tony, has been skimming from the trafficking profits. Lies, Damon shouted, but his eyes darted uncertainly to his lieutenants. Jorge shifted uncomfortably, while others avoided their boss's gaze. The thing about paranoia, Damon, Ray continued, his tone almost conversational, is that once it starts, it's hard to stop. You're already suspicious of everyone around you. Why else would you double the guards? Why else would you keep changing your routines? Shut up. Damon raised his gun, but his hand wasn't quite steady. Jorge, Tony, take him down. The enforcers moved forward, but Ray was ready. Years of training and muscle memory took over as the first punch came his way. He deflected it smoothly, using Jorge's momentum to throw him into Tony. Both men crashed into a stack of crates. 3 more gang members rushed him from different angles. Ray moved like water, each motion precise and economical. A strike to the solar plexus dropped the first attacker. An arm lock and swift throw neutralized the second. The third found himself suddenly airborne, landing hard on his back. Stop him! Damon screamed, but his remaining men hesitated. They'd never seen anyone move like this. Ray pressed his advantage, keeping his body between the gang and the trafficking victims. His combat style was defensive yet devastating. No killing moves, but precise strikes to disable and disarm. One by one, Damon's enforcers went down. Jorge managed to get back up, pulling a knife. Ray caught his wrist mid-swing, twisted, and sent the big man flying into a wall. The impact knocked Jorge unconscious. Damon, seeing his men defeated, made a sudden dash for the door. Kill them all, he shouted over his shoulder, running toward the stairs. "Michael," Ray called out, "get them to the exit point. Marcus is waiting." As Michael began guiding the trafficking victims toward safety, Ray pursued Damon through the warehouse. The gang leader had grabbed a duffel bag, presumably containing the operation's cash, and was heading for the roof. Ray followed, his movements swift and silent. Through his earpiece, he could hear Marcus coordinating with Catherine's team. "Police are 3 minutes out. Roof is covered." The chase led them up 4 flights of stairs. Damon burst onto the roof, the city lights spread out before him like a glittering carpet. He ran toward the building's edge, where a fire escape offered a potential route down. "It's over, Damon," Ray called out, emerging onto the roof. "The police are coming. Your operation is exposed. Your men are down. It's never over." Damon turned his gun trained on Ray. "You think you've won? The Iron Blades are just one part of something bigger. We have connections you can't imagine." "Maybe," Ray acknowledged, slowly moving forward. "But right now, it's just you and me." Damon's eyes darted around, looking for escape routes. The roof was vast but offered little cover, just some ventilation units and old satellite dishes. Ray kept advancing, forcing Damon to circle away from the fire escape. "Stay back." Damon's finger tightened on the trigger. "I'll shoot." "No, you won't." Ray's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Because you know that gunshot will bring every cop in East Bridge running. And you're not ready for that kind of attention." Rain had begun to fall, making the rooftop slick. Ray used this to his advantage, maneuvering Damon toward a particularly wet section near an air conditioning unit. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Damon snarled, but his confidence was cracking. "We have judges in our pocket, cops on our payroll." Ray corrected. "Past tense. The evidence is already uploaded. Every transaction, every criminal connection, every corrupt official. Catherine's task force is everything they need." Damon's eyes widened. In that moment of shock, Ray made his move. He lunged forward just as Damon fired, but Ray had already predicted the shot's trajectory. He slipped past the bullet's path, closed the distance, and executed a perfect disarming technique. The gun went flying as both men grappled on the wet roof. Damon fought with the desperate strength of a cornered animal, but Ray's training proved superior. Each of Damon's wild swings was countered with precise blocks and strikes. Finally, Ray saw his opening. As Damon charged forward, Ray used the gang leader's own momentum against him. A swift leg sweep combined with a shoulder throw sent Damon crashing onto his back, the impact driving the air from his lungs. Before Damon could recover, Ray had him in a submission hold. The sound of police sirens grew louder as red and blue lights began reflecting off the surrounding buildings. "Listen carefully," Ray said quietly as he secured Damon's wrists with zip ties. "Your organization is finished. The evidence is public. But here's what you should really be worried about. The neighborhood isn't afraid anymore." As if to prove his point, shouts could be heard from the street below. Residents were emerging from their homes, pointing police toward the warehouse. Through his earpiece, Ray heard Marcus confirming that all the trafficking victims were safe. The roof access door burst open as Catherine Morrison led a tactical team onto the roof. "Ray," she called out, "building is secure. Michael and the others are safe." Damon struggled weakly as officers took him into custody. But before they led him away, he turned to Ray with a cold smile. "You think this is a victory? You have no idea what's coming. The people I work for, they'll burn this neighborhood to the ground just to teach you a lesson." Ray watched calmly as Damon was led away. "They can try." Over the next few hours, the warehouse became a hive of police activity. Evidence was collected, statements were taken, and the full scope of the Iron Blades operation was exposed. Ray provided his testimony efficiently, then slipped away from the cameras in chaos. He found Michael helping Mrs. Chun sweep up broken glass outside her shop, the last visible sign of the gang's presence. "The neighborhood watch is organizing patrols," Michael told him. "Mr. Patel is talking about starting a community safety committee. People are tired of being afraid." Ray nodded, watching as more residents emerged to help clean up their streets. Sarah Martinez was organizing a group to repaint over gang tags. Even Officer Ramirez was there, looking somewhat ashamed as he offered to help. "What you did," Michael continued, "it showed people they don't have to accept things the way they are. That one person can make a difference. Not one person, Ray corrected. A community. The iron blades were strong because people were isolated, afraid to stand together. That changes now. Later that night, Ray sat in his cab, parked in his usual spot. The neighborhood felt different, lighter somehow, as if a long shadow had finally lifted. But he knew Damon's warning shouldn't be ignored. Whatever organization had been backing the iron blades wouldn't take this defeat lightly. His phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. Task force is expanding. Could use someone with your experience. Ray smiled slightly, but didn't respond immediately. He watched as a group of young men, former gang members, helped an elderly woman carry her groceries. Nearby, children played freely in the street for the first time in months. This was what he'd been training for all his life, he realized. Not just protecting presidents and diplomats, but standing up for people who needed someone to show them they could stand up for themselves. His burner phone chimed. Marcus checking in. So, partner, what's next? Damon's friends won't be happy. Ray started his cab's engine, his decision made. Then I guess they'll have to deal with an angry cab driver. As he pulled away from the curb, Ray caught sight of his reflection in the rearview mirror. The quiet life he'd built had been comfortable, safe. But sometimes safety isn't what's needed. Sometimes what's needed is someone willing to step out of the shadows and show others how to fight back. The war for East Bridge was won, but Ray Carter knew this was just the beginning. There would be other battles, other threats. But this time, he wouldn't be fighting alone. The community had found its strength, its voice, its courage. And a former Secret Service agent turned cab driver would be there to help them every step of the way, whether the next threat came from street gangs or shadows much darker and deeper. The night wrapped around his taxi like a familiar coat as Ray began his regular route. But now, every street corner held not just memories of what had been, but promises of what could be. The neighborhood was awakening, transforming, healing, and Ray Carter would be there to protect it, one fare at a time. Dawn was breaking over East Bridge as Ray Carter led the group of rescued trafficking victims down the warehouse steps. Police vehicles surrounded the building, their lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue. Social workers and medical personnel rushed forward to help, but Ray stayed with the women until each one was safely in the care of professionals. A young woman caught his sleeve as she was being led to an ambulance. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her voice was steady. "Thank you," she said in halting English. "We thought no one would come." Ray squeezed her hand gently. "You're safe now. They can't hurt you anymore." Michael Torres appeared at his side, his face still bruised but his eyes bright. "The FBI is here," he said quietly. "They're saying this is bigger than anyone thought. International trafficking rings, corrupt officials. You helped make that happen," Ray replied. "Your courage in standing up to them started all of this." Michael shook his head. "I just refused to join them. You're the one who had the training to do something about it," Ray finished. "But it was your choice that mattered. Choices always matter." The words triggered a memory he'd been trying to suppress. Prague, 15 years ago. "Go!" William shouted through the comm. "Get the diplomat out. I'll hold him here." Ray's voice was urgent. "Negative. Fall back to position 3. We'll extract together." "No time." Gunfire echoed through the channel. "They're flanking. Someone has to slow them down." "David, don't." "It's the job, Ray. Sometimes one person has to stand so others can live." A pause, then, "Make it count, partner. Whatever you do after this, make it count." The explosion that followed haunted Ray's dreams for years. He completed the mission. The diplomat survived, but the cost had been too high. He'd spent years wondering if he could have done something differently, made a different choice. "Detective," a uniformed officer interrupted his thoughts. "Captain Reeves wants to see you." Ray found the police captain standing near the command vehicle, reviewing reports. James Reeves was a 20-year veteran of the force, his face weathered by years of dealing with the city's darker elements. "Hell of a thing you did here, Carter," Reeves said without looking up. "Task Force is calling it the biggest human trafficking bust in the city's history. Just doing what needed to be done." Now Reeves did look up, his expression serious. "That's not your job anymore. You're a civilian now. Next time you stumble onto something like this, you call us first. Understood?" Ray met his gaze steadily. "Of course, Captain." They both knew it was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that let everyone save face. As the morning progressed, Ray watched the Iron Blades empire crumble. Gang members who hadn't been arrested were abandoning their posts, trying to distance themselves from the organization. Some were already approaching officers, offering information in exchange for leniency. The neighborhood was changing too. People who had been hiding behind locked doors were emerging, talking to their neighbors, reclaiming their streets. Ray saw Mr. Patel removing the extra locks from his store's door. Down the block, the community center was reopening, its windows no longer boarded up. His cab needed some repairs after the chase, so Ray walked through the streets, observing the transformation. He passed Sarah Martinez organizing a group of volunteers to clean up graffiti. Tommy was with her, proudly wearing a Community Watch t-shirt that was several sizes too big. "Mr. Ray," Tommy called out, waving. "Mom says you're a hero." Ray smiled but shook his head. Heroes are people who stand up for what's right, even when they're scared. Like your mom here, organizing all this. Sarah blushed slightly. "It's nothing special. We're tired of being afraid." "That's exactly what makes it special," Ray replied. He continued his walk, eventually reaching Mrs. Chen's small shop. The elderly woman was trying to sweep up broken glass, remnants of the Iron Blade's last acts of intimidation. Without a word, Ray took the broom from her trembling hands. "Ah, Ray," she smiled, though her eyes were wet. "Always helping. But this mess, too big for one person. Good thing I'm not alone then." Ray nodded toward the street, where several neighbors were approaching with cleaning supplies and tools. Within hours, the shop was not just cleaned but improved. Windows replaced, shelves repaired, and a fresh coat of paint on the walls. As Ray helped Mrs. Chen reorganize her inventory, a man in an expensive suit entered the shop. Something about his posture set off warning bells in Ray's mind. This wasn't a casual shopper. "Mr. Carter," the man said smoothly. "A moment of your time?" They stepped outside. The man didn't offer his name, but his bearing screamed federal agent. "Impressive work with the Iron Blades," he said, watching the community's cleanup efforts. "But you've stirred up quite a hornet's nest." Damon Rodriguez was just a middle manager in a much larger organization. "People higher up are concerned about your interference. Are you warning me or threatening me?" The man smiled thinly. "Let's call it context. There's a power vacuum now. Dangerous people will try to fill it. If you're interested in getting ahead of that." He held out a business card with only a phone number. "We could use someone with your particular skills." Before Ray could respond, his phone buzzed. "Marcus calling." "Tell me you're not still at the scene," his old partner said without preamble. "Just helping with cleanup." "Why?" "Because I'm looking at some very interesting chatter. Remember that thing in Buenos Aires? The one that never officially happened? Same players are showing interest in East Bridge." Ray's jaw tightened. Buenos Aires had been bad. Corruption at the highest levels, international crime syndicates, and enough dead agents to fill a cemetery. "How much time?" "Hard to say." "But Ray," Marcus's voice was grim. "Watch your back. These aren't street thugs you're dealing with anymore." Later that night, in his apartment, Ray stood at his window, watching the street below. His service weapon, maintained but in use for years, lay on the table beside him. With practiced movements, he checked the magazine, loaded a round into the chamber, then secured the weapon in his shoulder holster. The neighborhood was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Not the silence of fear, but the peace of people who had reclaimed their homes. Ray could see lights on in apartments that had been dark for months, hear children playing in courtyards that had been gang territory just days ago. He'd done what he set out to do, helped free his community from the Iron Blade's grip. But Damon's warning echoed in his mind. "You have no idea what's coming." The mysterious man's business card sat on his table, its phone number seeming to glow in the dim light. Beside it lay Marcus's latest text, "Buenos Aires players confirmed." Moving pieces into position. Ray thought about Mrs. Chen's tearful smile as her shop reopened. About Michael Torres, planning to return to college. About Tommy Martinez proudly wearing his oversized Community Watch shirt. They'd all chosen to stand up, to reclaim their lives from fear. He couldn't walk away now, couldn't return to being just a cab driver who kept his head down. But he also couldn't shake the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Whatever was coming would be bigger, more dangerous than anything the Iron Blades had thrown at him. His phone buzzed again. Catherine this time. Task force briefing tomorrow. You should be there. Ray looked at his reflection in the window. The quiet, unassuming cab driver was still there. But now something else showed through. The trained agent, the protector, the man who had finally found his purpose again. Make it count, partner, Williams had said with his last breath. Looking at his neighborhood, battered but unbroken, healing but still vulnerable, Ray knew he was finally doing just that. He couldn't know what threats were coming, what battles lay ahead. But as he watched his community sleeping peacefully for the first time in months, Ray Carter knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next, he would be ready. And this time, he wouldn't be fighting alone. The community center buzzed with activity as residents of East Bridge gathered for what was officially called a neighborhood appreciation dinner. But everyone knew who they were really there to honor, even if the guest of honor himself seemed determined to stay in the background. Ray Carter stood near the back of the room, watching as families filled the tables. Mrs. Chun had outdone herself with the catering, her dumplings disappearing almost as fast as she could bring them out. Mr. Patel's store had provided decorations, and Sarah Martinez had organized everything with her usual efficiency. You can't hide back here all night, Sarah told him, appearing at his side with a plate of food. People want to thank you. They don't need to, Ray replied. The community did this themselves. They just needed a reminder of their own strength. Always so modest, Mrs. Chin clicked her tongue as she passed by. Bad for business. Good for hero. Before Ray could protest that he wasn't a hero, Michael Torres took the microphone at the front of the room. His face had healed from the beating he'd taken, and he stood straight and confident. I know Mr. Carter didn't want any formal ceremony, Michael began, causing a ripple of knowing laughter through the crowd. And he specifically said no speeches. So I'll just say this. Sometimes one person's courage can inspire others to find their own. A round of applause filled the room, and several people turned expectantly toward Ray. With a resigned smile, he made his way to the front. Thank you, he said simply, his voice carrying clearly through the room. But this isn't about me. This is about all of you. Every person who chose to stand up instead of looking away. Every shop owner who refused to be intimidated. Every parent who wanted something better for their children. He paused, looking out over the faces he'd come to know so well over the years. East Bridge isn't just a neighborhood, it's a community. And communities survive by standing together, by watching out for each other, by refusing to let fear win. What happened with the Iron Blades wasn't about one person fighting back. It was about all of us deciding enough was enough. The applause was thunderous, but Ray was already moving back into the shadows, letting the community celebrate itself. Later, as people were starting to leave, Michael caught up with him again. I wanted you to know, the young man said, I'm changing my major, going into social work. There are other kids out there like me, feeling trapped, needing someone to show them there's another way. Ray smiled, genuine pride warming his voice. You'll be good at it. You understand what they're going through. I was hoping. Michael hesitated. Some of us were talking. We want to learn how to protect ourselves, our families. Not to fight, but just to be prepared. Would you consider teaching us? Ray studied him for a long moment. Meet me at the community center tomorrow morning. Early. And bring anyone else who's serious about learning. The next few weeks fell into a new routine. Every morning before dawn, Ray led a small group through basic self-defense training. He kept the lessons simple: awareness, de-escalation, escape techniques. But he also watched for those with natural talent, the ones who might be capable of more. Remember, he told them one morning as they practiced break falls, the goal isn't to win fights. It's to make sure fights never start. Your best weapon is your mind, awareness, preparation, control. The group was diverse. Young professionals like Michael, shop owners' kids, even a few former gang members looking for a different path. One of these, a teenager named Alex Rodriguez, no relation to Damon, approached Ray after class one day. I need to tell you something, Alex said, his voice low, about the organization Damon worked for. The people above him, they're planning something big. Something that makes the Iron Blades look like nothing. Ray led him to a quiet corner. What do you know? Not much, but I know who knows more. Alex glanced around nervously. There's this guy, calls himself the broker. He set up all the Iron Blades international connections. I can tell you how to find him." The information weighed heavily on Ray's mind as he drove his regular routes. Catherine's task force was making progress, but they were fighting against deeply entrenched corruption. The mysterious man's business card sat in his glove compartment, next to his old Secret Service badge, offering another path. As days passed, Ray kept working quietly in the background. He helped Mr. Patel install a better security system in his store. He taught Sarah's son Tommy basic situational awareness disguised as games. He connected former gang members with job training programs and counseling services. Small changes added up. The Community Watch program grew stronger, with organized patrols and a communication network. Local businesses formed an association for mutual support. The community center offered more programs, keeping young people engaged and off the streets. But Ray never forgot the warnings about what was coming. He maintained a surveillance network, watching for signs of new players trying to move into the vacuum left by the Iron Blades. He kept in touch with Marcus and Catherine, sharing information and building a clearer picture of the larger threat. One morning, he found a package outside his apartment door. No return address, no markings. Inside was a USB drive and a note written in elegant handwriting. "You took down a piece of the puzzle. Want to see the whole picture?" The drive contained documents, photos, and financial records that connected the Iron Blades to a vast criminal enterprise. Shell companies, corrupt officials, international trafficking routes, all pointing to something far bigger and more dangerous than a local gang. Ray sat in his apartment, studying the evidence. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across his walls. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, Buenos Aires players making moves. Time to choose a side. He thought about Michael's determination to help others, about Mrs. Chin's resilience, about Alex's courage in coming forward. He thought about William's last words, "Make it count." The quiet life he'd built as a cab driver had served its purpose, helping him heal, giving him a connection to the community. But now that community needed something more from him. The shadows he'd hidden in were about to become his hunting ground. Ray reached for his phone and dialed the number on the mysterious business card. "I'm in," he said when the line connected. "But on my terms. This isn't about agencies or jurisdictions. This is about protecting people who can't protect themselves." "Understood," the voice replied. "Welcome back, Agent Carter." The next morning, Ray started his cab as usual, pulling out into the streets of East Bridge just as the sun began to rise. But now he saw everything with new clarity, not just his neighborhood, but the wider war he was about to rejoin. In his rearview mirror, he caught glimpses of his passengers' lives. Mrs. Chen opening her shop, Michael heading to his social work classes, Sarah and Tommy walking to school. Each one represented what he was fighting for, not just their safety, but their right to live without fear, to build something better. The sunrise painted the city in shades of gold and promise as Ray's taxi merged into traffic. To anyone watching, he was just another cab driver starting his day. But now he was something more, a guardian operating in plain sight, a protector who understood that sometimes the biggest battles are fought in the smallest places. His radio crackled with a fair request, and Ray smiled slightly as he accepted it. The war for East Bridge had been won, but a bigger fight was just beginning. And Ray Carter was ready, not just as a former Secret Service agent, not just as a cab driver, but as something unique, a man who had found his true purpose in the space between shadows and light. The city stretched out before him, full of challenges and possibilities. Somewhere out there, powerful people were moving pieces on a board they thought they controlled. But they were about to learn what the Iron Blades had learned, that sometimes the most dangerous player is the one they never saw coming. Ray's cab disappeared into the morning traffic, becoming just another part of the city's awakening. But now he carried with him not just his passengers' trust, but a community's hope and a renewed sense of purpose. The story of the cab driver who fought back against the gang was ending. But the legend of Ray Carter, the guardian of East Bridge, was just beginning. And somewhere in the city, as his taxi rolled into the sunrise, a new chapter was waiting to unfold. If you enjoyed this tale of justice, redemption, and the power of one man to change a community, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more thrilling stories. Leave a comment below. What would you do if you discovered your friendly neighborhood cab driver was actually a legendary Secret Service agent? Stay tuned for more stories that remind us heroes don't always wear badges. Sometimes they just drive a taxi.